July 9, 1944. The Royal Naval Hospital at Seaforth, Liverpool. Captain Frederic John Walker lies motionless in a hospital bed, his breathing shallow, his war finally ending. He is 48 years old. His heart has given out, not from enemy action, but from exhaustion so complete that the official naval message will state his death was aggravated by and attributable to the conditions of his naval service. Behind him lies the wreckage of 20 German submarines, more than any commander in any navy in history. Outside the hospital window, the grey waters of the Mersey flow toward the Irish Sea, toward the Atlantic where his ships are still hunting. The most successful U-boat killer who ever lived has been killed not by torpedoes or depth charges, but by his own refusal to rest while German submarines still prowled the convoy lanes. This is the story of how one man passed over for promotion, dismissed as an anti-submarine enthusiast in a navy that valued gunnery and torpedoes, invented tactics the Admiralty rejected, then proved those tactics so devastating that he changed the course of the Battle of the Atlantic. In 1939, the German U-boat force numbered just 57 submarines. By the standards of the Kriegsmarine, this was a modest fleet. Admiral Karl Dönitz, the mastermind of submarine warfare, had calculated that he needed 300 boats to strangle Britain into submission. He did not have them, not yet. But what he did have was a strategy so devastatingly simple it would bring the British Empire to the brink of starvation. The Wolf Pack. Instead of hunting alone, Dönitz's submarines would spread across the convoy routes in patrol lines stretching hundreds of miles, waiting in the darkness like spiders in a web. When one boat spotted a convoy, it would shadow and report, calling in every submarine within range. Then at night they would attack together, surfaced, invisible to the primitive sonar of the day, their low profiles lost in the wave troughs, slipping between the escorts to torpedo merchant ships from point-blank range. The mathematics were brutal. In the first 3 months of war, U-boats sank over 400,000 tons of shipping and lost only 9 submarines. By June 1940, as Britain stood alone after the fall of France, the monthly toll climbed to nearly 600,000 tons. At that rate, the merchant fleet would be destroyed within months. Britain would be starved into surrender without a single German soldier setting foot on British soil. Winston Churchill later wrote that the only thing that ever really frightened him during the war was the U-boat peril. He understood what the loss of the Atlantic would mean. No American tanks rolling off the ships at Liverpool, no Canadian wheat filling the granaries, no oil to fuel the Spitfires, no steel to build the bombers, no aircraft to defend the cities, no hope. The Royal Navy's response was desperately inadequate. Convoy escorts were fewer than half what the Admiralty estimated they needed just to maintain basic coverage. The tactics they employed were defensive, almost passive. The official doctrine held that an escort's job was to shepherd the convoy from point A to point B, driving off U-boats rather than destroying them. If a submarine attacked and was forced to dive, the escorts would make a brief search, drop a pattern of depth charges, then hurry back to the convoy. The U-boat would surface when the coast was clear, lick its wounds, repair what damage it could, and resume the hunt. It was, in the assessment of one officer, who would later revolutionize anti-submarine warfare, precisely backwards. That officer's name was Frederic John Walker. He had been born in Plymouth in 1896, the son of a naval family. He joined the Royal Navy as a cadet in 1909, passing out top of his class at Dartmouth and winning the King's Medal. He served on destroyers during the First World War, experiencing the chaos and fear of surface actions in the North Sea, learning how ships fought and died in the grey waters where fleets clashed. After the armistice, he joined the battleship HMS Valiant, then spent the interwar years in what the Navy considered an unglamorous backwater, anti-submarine warfare. While other ambitious officers specialized in gunnery or torpedoes, the prestigious fields that led to battleship commands and flag rank, Walker haunted the training school at HMS Osprey on the Isle of Portland. He studied sonar theory until he could interpret the pings and echoes better than the equipment operators. He experimented with depth charge patterns, calculating optimal spacings and depths, filling notebooks with calculations and diagrams. He thought constantly about how to find and kill submarines, how to turn the hunter into the hunted. The Navy noticed his expertise. They assigned him to specialized positions. They did not promote him. By 1939, Walker was 43 years old, still a commander, passed over for captain and scheduled for early retirement. In a service that valued big ships and big guns, his obsession with submarine hunting seemed irrelevant, even eccentric. The battleship admirals could not imagine that the next war would be won or lost, not in great fleet actions with salvos and searchlights, but in the grey, grinding battle for the convoy routes. When war came, Walker was appointed Operations Staff Officer to Vice Admiral Sir Bertram Ramsay, a prestigious staff position that kept him far from the sea. He helped plan the Dunkirk evacuation, working around the clock to coordinate the impossible rescue of over 300,000 men from the beaches of France. For his work, He was mentioned in dispatches, but the recognition only deepened his frustration. He was desperate for a ship command. He bombarded his superiors with requests, writing letter after letter, making personal visits to anyone who might help. In March 1941, Walker traveled to the Admiralty to plead his case personally with Captain George Creasy, the director of anti-submarine warfare. Creasy knew better than anyone how badly the battle against the U-boats needed officers with Walker's technical knowledge. Convoy losses were mounting. Good commanders were dying faster than the Navy could train them. And here was the most knowledgeable anti-submarine specialist in the service, wasted on a desk job. Creasy wrote a personal letter to the Commander-in-Chief, Western Approaches, outlining Walker's qualifications and recommending him for command. Finally, in October 1941, 18 months after the war began, the Navy relented. Walker was given command of HMS Stork, a 1,200-ton Bittern-class sloop, and leadership of the 36th Escort Group. His force consisted of 2 sloops and 7 corvettes, based at Gladstone Dock in Bootle, near Liverpool. It was a modest command, but Walker intended to prove something. The crews of the 36th Escort Group quickly learned that their new commander was unlike any officer they had served under. Walker drilled them relentlessly, not just in ship handling and depth charge patterns, but in coordinated tactics he had developed over years of study. His methods were built on one radical premise that contradicted Navy doctrine. The job of an escort was not merely to protect the convoy, it was to destroy the enemy. Walker believed that passive defense was suicide by inches. Every U-boat driven off would return, bringing friends. Every submarine that survived an attack would radio its observations to Dönitz, calling more boats to the kill. The only way to win was to hunt aggressively, to pursue contacts until the submarine was destroyed or forced to surrender, to make the U-boat crews understand that attacking a convoy protected by the 36th Escort Group meant death. He developed what he called the creeping attack, a technique that exploited the fundamental weakness of existing tactics. Standard procedure called for an escort detecting a submerged U-boat to accelerate toward the contact, maintaining sonar contact until the last moment, then dropping depth charges as it passed overhead. The problem was that sonar, the British called it ASTIC, pointed forward. As the attacking ship closed the final few hundred yards, it lost contact with the target directly beneath its keel. The U-boat commander, hearing the escort's propellers accelerating, knew exactly when that loss of contact would occur. He would wait until the last moment, then turn hard and evade. The depth charges would explode harmlessly astern, killing only fish. Walker's solution was elegant in its simplicity. 2 ships would work together. One would hang back at 1,500 yards, maintaining continuous sonar contact, its pings audible to the submarine below, a constant reminder of imminent death. The second would creep forward at dead, slow speed, making no sound detectable through the submarine's hull, using no sonar, guided entirely by signals from the directing ship. The U-boat crew, hearing only the steady pings from the first vessel, would have no warning of the silent killer gliding overhead. When the attacking ship reached the perfect position, the directing vessel would signal. The attacker would release its depth charges on that signal and immediately accelerate away. The directing ship would then race in and drop its own pattern, catching any submarine that tried to evade. It was a devastating technique, but it required practice, precision, and the kind of aggressive coordination that the Navy had never taught. Walker had another innovation, the hold down. Instead of making brief attacks and returning to the convoy, he would keep a U-boat submerged for hours, driving it deeper and deeper with repeated depth charge patterns. Submarines of the era had limited battery capacity. They could not stay submerged indefinitely. The air grew foul, the batteries drained, the crew weakened. Eventually, the U-boat would have to surface to recharge its batteries and draw fresh air, or suffocate in the darkness below. When it did surface, Walker would be waiting with every gun trained on the spot. The 36th Escort Group's first test came in December 1941. Walker's ships were assigned to escort convoy HG-76, 32 merchant ships homeward bound from Gibraltar, their holds filled with cargo that Britain desperately needed. Intelligence indicated that a wolf pack codenamed Sea Räuber, the Sea Robbers, was lying in wait. German agents in Spain had observed the convoy's departure and radioed every detail to Dönitz's headquarters: the number of ships, the strength of the escort, the time of sailing. The Germans committed 9 U-boats to the attack. They also had something new: coordination with Focke-Wulf Condor bombers operating from French airfields, capable of locating convoys far out in the Atlantic and guiding submarines to the intercept. What the Germans did not expect was Johnnie Walker. On the bridge of HMS Stork, Walker stands in the darkness, binoculars pressed to his eyes. The convoy has been sighted. Somewhere beyond the horizon, condors circle at the edge of visibility, their positions radioed to the waiting submarines. Somewhere beneath the grey Atlantic, 9 U-boats are converging on his 32 merchant ships. The wind cuts through his bridge coat, salt spray stings his face. Around him, the convoy spreads across miles of ocean, tiny lights showing where 32 captains maintain their stations in the darkness. Each of those lights represents a ship that Britain cannot afford to lose. Each ship carries men who will never see their families again if Walker fails tonight. Standard doctrine would have him keep his escorts close, a defensive screen around the convoy. Instead, he sends his ships hunting. On December 17th, a martlet fighter from the escort carrier, Audacity spots U-131 on the surface 20 miles from the convoy. Walker orders Stork to maximum speed. The old sloop shudders as her engines work up to full power. His sloops and destroyers fan out, racing toward the contact. The submarine dives, but Walker's ships are ready. They establish sonar contact and begin the hunt. In the sonar room of Stork, the operator leans forward, headphones pressed tight against his ears. The pings go out, sharp, metallic, searching. The returns come back, faint echoes that tell him something solid is moving through the deep. He calls out the bearing. Walker adjusts his attack. For hours, they pound the depths with depth charges. The explosions roll across the ocean like distant thunder, columns of water rising white against the grey sky. U-131 twists and dives, her commander fighting to escape, but Walker's ships work in coordination, each vessel driving the boat toward the next. Finally, the submarine breaks the surface, her hull damaged, water flooding through cracked seams. British gunfire rakes the conning tower before the hatch can open. Men spill into the water. U-131 goes down, her bow rising toward the sky, then sliding beneath the waves forever. First blood. Over the next 5 days, the battle raged across hundreds of miles of ocean. The wolf pack attacked again and again, but Walker's escorts were everywhere, aggressive and relentless. His group sank 3 more U-boats. A 5th was destroyed by other escorts. The submarine ace Engelbert Endras, one of Dönitz's most successful commanders, holder of the Knight's Cross, veteran of over 20 war patrols, died when his boat was depth-charged and never surfaced again. The escort carrier Audacity was lost, torpedoed while recovering aircraft, along with a destroyer and 2 merchant ships. But the convoy delivered 30 ships safely to British ports. It was the first clear Allied victory in the Battle of the Atlantic. For the first time, a convoy had fought its way through a concentrated wolf pack attack and inflicted heavier losses on the enemy than it suffered. Walker was awarded the Distinguished Service Order. The citation spoke of his daring, skill, and determination. More importantly, he had proven that aggressive tactics worked, but the Navy was not ready to learn. In October 1942, Walker was brought ashore. The Admiralty assigned him to a desk job as Captain D. Liverpool, a staff position intended to give him rest after the strain of convoy battles. Walker hated every moment. He paced his office. He bombarded his superiors with requests for a sea command, arguing that his experience was wasted behind a desk while U-boats still prowled the Atlantic. The Battle of the Atlantic was reaching its crisis point. Monthly shipping losses climbed toward catastrophic levels. In March 1943, U-boats would sink over 600,000 tons, the worst month of the entire war, and one of the Navy's most successful escort commanders was filing paperwork in Liverpool. Then, in November 1942, Admiral Sir Max Horton took command of Western approaches. Horton was a former submarine commander himself, a man who had prowled the Baltic during the First World War, sinking German warships from beneath the waves. He understood the U-boat threat from the enemy's perspective. More importantly, he understood what it would take to defeat them. Horton listened to Walker's ideas about aggressive hunting groups, freed from convoy escort duties, roaming the Atlantic to find and destroy submarines wherever they gathered. He agreed that such tactics could change the balance of the war. In February 1943, Walker returned to sea. He was given command of the 2nd Support Group, 6 Black Swan-class sloops, Starling, Wild Goose, Wren, Woodpecker, Kite, and Cygnet. These were not convoy escorts, they were hunters. Walker made his flagship HMS Starling, a sleek new vessel built on the Clyde and commissioned just weeks before. He requested as many of his old crew from Stork as the Navy would release and got nearly half of them. These men knew his methods. They had practiced his tactics in calm seas and storms. They trusted his leadership. They had seen what he could do. The 2nd Support Group became the most lethal anti-submarine force in any navy. Walker drove his crews hard, drilling constantly between patrols, perfecting the coordinated tactics he had developed over years of study. He added new techniques to his arsenal, the plaster attack, in which 3 or more sloops would line up abreast and saturate an area with simultaneous depth charge patterns, creating a wall of explosions that no submarine could evade. He refined the hold down, developing signals and procedures that allowed his ships to maintain contact for days if necessary. His crews noticed something else about their captain. He never stopped. While other commanders rested in their cabins during quiet watches, Walker remained on the bridge, watching, listening, thinking. He ate meals standing up, his eyes on the horizon. He slept in snatches, never more than an hour or two at a time. His face grew gaunt, his uniform loose on his frame. But the ships kept sailing and the U-boats kept dying. On June 1st, 1943, the second support group made its first kill. They detected U-202 southeast of Cape Farewell, Greenland, and hunted it for 15 hours, the longest pursuit of the campaign to that point. The submarine dove deep, twisted, changed course, used every trick its commander knew. Walker's ships followed, methodical and patient, their sonar pinging through the depths like a metronome counting down the hours of a man's life. When the submarine finally surfaced, her batteries exhausted, her air foul, her crew gasping, Walker's guns were waiting. The first shells struck before the conning tower hatch could open. U-202 went down with all hands. The second support group had drawn first blood. 3 weeks later, in the Bay of Biscay, Walker rammed U-119. His ship's bow crushed the submarine's hull as she tried to dive, the impact throwing men from their feet throughout Starling. The sloop was damaged, her bow crumpled, compartments flooding, and had to return to port for repairs. But Walker remained with the group, transferring his flag to Wild Goose until his ship was ready. He would not leave his men. He would not rest while submarines still hunted. On July 30th, 1943, came the moment that would define Walker's legend. British aircraft reported 3 U-boats on the surface in the Bay of Biscay, traveling together in the new German tactic of mutual defense against air attack. If bombers came, the submarines would stay surfaced and combine their anti-aircraft fire, making the approach too dangerous for a single aircraft. Walker's group was 60 miles away. He ordered maximum speed. A Starling raced toward the contact, her engines straining, smoke pouring from her funnels. Walker did something no Royal Navy officer had done since the age of sail. He ordered the signal hoist, general chase. It was a command that Francis Drake had used against the Spanish Armada in 1588. Horatio Nelson had flown it at the Battle of the Nile in 1798. Now Walker raised it against an enemy that Drake and Nelson could never have imagined. Steel sharks lurking beneath the waves. The signal gave his captains permission to break formation and attack independently, pursuing the enemy at their best speed. It transformed the engagement from a coordinated hunt into a melee. On the bridges of 6 sloops, captains read the signal and felt their hearts race. General chase, the order that unleashed the hounds. The U-boats saw them coming. 3 submarines on the surface, caught in daylight, unable to dive because the approaching sloops would catch them helpless during the long minutes it took to submerge. They opened fire with deck guns and anti-aircraft weapons, shells splashing in the water around the racing sloops. Within minutes, all 3 U-boats had been hit. British shells tore through pressure hulls. Fire erupted on deck. Men died at their guns or threw themselves into the sea. 2 of the submarines were milchkuh, tanker boats designed to refuel other U-boats at sea, extending their patrols by weeks. Germany had only 10 of them. They were irreplaceable. In 10 minutes of chaos and gunfire, Walker's ships sank U-462 and U-504. A Royal Australian Air Force Sunderland flying boat, drawn by the battle, caught U-461 as she tried to escape and sent her to the bottom. In a single afternoon, Donitz lost 2 of his precious supply submarines and the operational U-boat that had been their escort. The wolf packs in the mid-Atlantic would feel the loss for months. Boats forced to return early because they could not refuel, patrols cut short, attacks abandoned. Walker returned to Liverpool in triumph. Crowds lined the docks. His men were heroes, but at Gladstone Dock, a staff officer was waiting with news that would break something inside him. His son Timothy, a sub-lieutenant serving aboard the submarine HMS Parthian, was dead. The boat had sailed from Malta in late July for a patrol in the Adriatic. On August 6th, she had been ordered to leave the patrol area. The signal was not acknowledged. Parthian failed to arrive at Beirut. There were no survivors, no wreckage, no explanation, just silence, and the certainty that 59 men, including Walker's eldest son, would never come home. Walker absorbed the news. He stood very still on the dock, the cheers of the crowd washing over him, his face betraying nothing. Then he went back to sea. If anything, the death of his son intensified Walker's pursuit of the enemy. His ships sailed patrol after patrol, hunting U-boats with relentless determination. His crews watched their captain drive himself beyond any reasonable limit. He rarely slept. He ate meals standing on the bridge, eyes scanning the horizon, listening for the sonar operator's report. He lost weight until his uniform hung loose. His face grew gaunt, the bones showing beneath the skin, but he would not stop. Perhaps he could not. In February 1944, the second support group achieved something unprecedented. In a single patrol, they sank 6 U-boats. The patrol began on January 29th. Within 48 hours, Walker's ships had destroyed U-592. On February 9th, in a 15-hour period of continuous action that left every man aboard Starling exhausted beyond words, they sank 3 more, U-238, U-734, and U-762. 2 days later, U-424 went down. On February 19th, U-264 became the 6th victim. HMS Woodpecker was torpedoed during the patrol, a German submarine's last defiant act. She took the hit but stayed afloat, her crew working desperately to save her. Walker's seamanship and the efforts of his men saved every sailor aboard, but Woodpecker sank while being towed home, slipping beneath the waves within sight of the Irish coast. When the second support group returned to Gladstone Dock on February 25th, the waterfront was packed. Thousands of people lined the docks, sailors in their dress uniforms, wrens waving caps, merchant seamen who knew what Walker's ships meant to their survival, dock workers who loaded the cargo that kept Britain alive. 2 military bands combined to play the group's unofficial anthem, "A Hunting We Will Go." Admiral Sir Max Horton waited on a destroyer's bridge with the First Lord of the Admiralty. Both men come to honor the most successful submarine hunter in naval history. As Starling led the sloops into harbor in line ahead, her battle ensign flying, her crew at attention, the bands struck up and the crowds roared. Captain G.N. Brewer had rigged a signal hoist that read, "Johnnie Walker still going strong." It was the greatest triumph of Walker's career. The Admiralty backdated his promotion to captain by 2 years, recognition that he should have held the rank long before, and awarded him a second bar to his Distinguished Service Order. But his men noticed that he did not celebrate. He smiled for the cameras. He acknowledged the cheers. He shook hands and accepted congratulations. But his eyes were elsewhere, perhaps on the grey Atlantic where more U-boats waited, perhaps on a son who would never see another homecoming. Walker's final mission was his most important. In June 1944, the Allies launched Operation Overlord, the invasion of Normandy. Everything depended on the success of the landings. Every tank, every soldier, every shell had to cross the English Channel without interference. 36 U-boats waited in their concrete pens along the French coast, ready to attack the invasion fleet. The second support group was assigned to keep them out. For 2 weeks, Walker's ships patrolled the western approaches, hunting any submarine that tried to reach the channel. The work was exhausting. Constant vigilance, endless hours at action stations, the knowledge that a single U-boat slipping through could massacre transport ships packed with soldiers. Not a single submarine reached the invasion beaches. Some were damaged in the approaches and forced to limp back to port. Others were sunk trying to break through. The invasion fleet crossed unmolested, delivering the armies that would liberate Europe. Walker received his 3rd bar to the Distinguished Service Order. He became only the 2nd officer in Royal Navy history to receive the decoration 4 times. But the D-Day patrol had taken everything he had left. He had not slept properly in weeks. He had pushed himself through the operation on determination alone, his body failing even as his mind refused to surrender. On July 7, 1944, Walker collapsed. He was admitted to the Royal Naval Hospital at Seaforth with a cerebral thrombosis, a blood clot in his brain, brought on by exhaustion and the accumulated stress of years of continuous combat operations. He died 2 days later. His ships were already back at sea when the end came. The men he had trained and inspired were hunting U-boats in the Atlantic approaches, continuing the work he had begun. They would sink 9 more submarines before the German surrender, bringing the second support group's total to 29 confirmed kills, more than any other Allied formation. Walker's funeral at Liverpool Cathedral drew nearly 1,000 mourners. His coffin was carried through the streets of the city he had defended, past the docks where his ships had berthed, to the pier head where the great liners had once called before the war turned the Mersey into a naval base. There it was, placed aboard the destroyer HMS Hesperus. His crew from the second support group could not attend. They were at sea hunting. The sailors who carried his coffin and formed the honor guard were mostly Canadian, men from ships that happened to be in port, paying tribute to a British captain whose victory had kept their convoys safe. They buried him at sea in Liverpool Bay, within sight of the Mersey where his convoys had come home. His widow Eileen cast the first wreath into the water. Then Hesperus turned for port, and Captain Walker made his final voyage alone. The Admiralty issued a statement after the war that assessed Walker's contribution to victory. The words were simple and unequivocal. Captain Walker, more than any other, won the Battle of the Atlantic. His methods had amazing success, and more than any other factor gave the Royal Navy supremacy over the U-boat. Think about that contrast. In 1939, Frederic John Walker was a passed-over commander, an anti-submarine specialist in a navy that did not value high-value submarine hunting, scheduled for early retirement. His ideas about aggressive tactics were rejected. His requests for sea command were denied. The establishment considered him an enthusiast, slightly odd, too focused on an unfashionable specialty. By 1944, he had sunk more enemy submarines than any commander in history. His tactics had been adopted throughout the fleet. His training methods had transformed the way the Royal Navy fought, and the Navy he served had worked him until his heart gave out. Today, a statue of Walker stands at the pierhead in Liverpool, looking out over the Mersey. It was unveiled in 1998 by the Duke of Edinburgh. The campaign for its creation was led by Walker's Old Boys Association, the men who had served under him and survived, who gathered every year during the Battle of the Atlantic weekend to honor their captain and remember their fallen comrades. The ship's bell from HMS Starling hangs in Bootletown Hall. It is rung before every council meeting, the sound carrying across the chamber like the echo of depth charges rolling across the Atlantic, a reminder of the debt that City owes to the man who kept its lifeline open. In the end, the Battle of the Atlantic cost Germany 781 U-boats and 30,000 submariners, 75% of all who served. The Allies lost 3,500 merchant ships and 72,000 sailors, merchant seamen, and naval personnel. The difference between victory and defeat was measured in ships sunk, convoys saved, and tactics perfected, and in the relentless determination of commanders like Frederic John Walker, who refused to accept that submarines were invincible, who invented new ways to find and kill them, and who drove himself to destruction in the process. July 9, 1944, the Royal Naval Hospital at Seaforth, Liverpool. Captain Walker lies still at last, his war finally over. Behind him, the grey Atlantic stretches toward horizons he will never see again. Beneath those waters lie the shattered hulls of 20 submarines, proof that one man, given the chance he spent years fighting for, could change the course of a war. The Admiralty passed him over. The Navy doubted his methods. The establishment dismissed anti-submarine warfare as a career for officers without ambition. But Johnnie Walker proved them all wrong. And that is why the Battle of the Atlantic was won.